Welcome back to Bazaar, I'm Inko, and it's time for another Bazaar Talks. Normally these come out on Wednesdays between patches. However, following launch week, there was a constant barrage of hotfixes, and I completely forgot that I actually even did a Bazaar Talks video, because normally I would have launched one on Wednesday, and Wednesday instead I was doing another patch review, because they're just coming out non-stop. And while I am very happy with the cadence of patches and how rapidly balance is coming, generally a big fan of every individual patch we've gotten, the most important piece of feedback I have is about those patches. I would really like Tempo to start communicating patches again. I mean, literally any information. I'll talk much more in detail about this later in the video, I don't want to distract too much at the beginning, but the long story short with the whole communication thing is that there is no joy of discovery and finding out your build has been nerfed and your plans ruined by surprise. It is a painful, unpleasant, and confusing process for the players. Lack of communication actively makes the game worse and benefits nothing. For now, that's all I want to say about the subject. Let's move briskly along. And I suppose let's start with the meta analysis. The meta has definitely been more defined and less healthy than the last couple patches, which was to be expected with a new character's release. Mac and Dooley dominate the current meta and really feel like they box out a lot of other strategies. It's not that Pig and Vanessa are unplayable, but rather the scope of their viable strategies feels much more narrow than Mac and Dooley. Sure, Dooley's only viable builds are basically Drill and Beetle Lockout, but there's so many moving parts in those archetypes, so much interplay with other archetypes, that it feels like the whole of his card pool can meaningfully engage with the viable builds that Dooley does have. On the other hand, for Vanessa and Pig, it feels like vast swathes of cards are not even remotely viable in 10-win runs, and it makes them much more unpleasant to play in addition to contributing towards their general weakness. And you might notice that while I listed specific sorts of builds for Dooley, I just said Mac dominates the current meta. I was not specific. I genuinely feel like Mac is the only character that can play the Bazaar the way it was intended, just janking together random piles of trash and taking it to 10 wins. This is partly because he does it so well that other characters with incomplete builds can barely compete with his jank builds. And then of course Mac's endgame is fantastic between the Moose Staff, Poppy, Athenor, Vat of Acid, yes it's still good enough, Freeze Lockout, and just the good old-fashioned bunch of burn items. I feel like he's gotten the most viable late-game archetypes out of any character by far. He is probably just generally overpowered, and it is Mac specifically that has made Pig feel so weak. The vast majority of Pig's early and mid-game defensive strategies are simply non-viable in the face of Mac's ability to scale poison and burn incredibly rapidly. And while I said Pig just now, what I actually meant was all early and mid-game defensive strategies. But that impacts Pig by far the most because Pig is really the only character where defensive strategies were remotely core to his success. And to be clear, there are ways to win on Pig and Vanessa. Frankly, though, so many of their game plans feel so weak that I find no joy in playing them and learning to optimize the lines that they have left. I don't want to say nerf Mac, because I love Mac, but nerf Mac. The raw power of his vast array of early and mid-game damage over time builds has essentially removed defensive game plans from the game. The only alternative is a buff so widespread and massive to all defensive cards that I would consider it to be bordering on a tremendous rework of the game. It would also be such tremendous power creep so early in Bazaar's life cycle that it would most assuredly be disastrous for the long-term health of the game. I generally try to avoid giving specific feedback on the minutia of game balance. I trust the devs to be both better at it than I am and have access to better data than my anecdotal experience. This time, however, I won't even start. I'm not even going to point a finger in the general direction of a card. Mac is too new, too tightly interlocked, for me to even know where to point at as the problem. I hope the data that Tempo has helps them make the right choices to rein him in. Having said all of that, knowing that Mac needs to be nerfed, I will also add, I would like Mac to much more freely interact with the transmutation mechanic. I feel like there is far too little access to a core mechanic currently, and far too great a disparity between runs with and without Distillery or even Alembic. Now, coming over to patch notes, you know, the one that we actually have, the one that was given to us, not the 4 hotfixes that have no communication with them, I'm going to go through a couple of changes here that I do think are worth calling out. And my first bit of feedback is that the Tatiana vendor, the toys from any character vendor, I don't understand why it exists. It feels like almost universally awful and unhelpful in my experience so far. I don't know what build it's meant to complete or help. It doesn't feel like it fulfills any flavor that needed to exist. It's just weird. I don't know why we have this. I will also mention that there is this note here saying they simplified some of the targeting rules around freeze, haste, and slow crowd control in general. I don't know what that was meant to convey, but the effect in game feels like it's either bugged and implemented wrong, or it's just a vastly worse system than what we had previously. The old system where it would smart target things that were not affected felt much, much better. Now fights feel fundamentally more random because the targeting is simply not smart targeting at all the way it used to. I think the way it used to, because it reduced randomness, felt better. It's simultaneously unfun to lose on either side of the more random version of this, whether it's because you're playing a flagship build with 4 active items and every slow just stacks up on your flagship even though it could target something else, or whether you're the guy with the slows and you just put all 8 of your slows on the already slowed catfish that doesn't really matter. It just opens the game up to a bunch of feels bad randomness that doesn't really improve the game in any way. Now, I'm not going to point at too many items specifically, but I will point at one, and I kind of feel bad pointing at a Vanessa item at all, but coming down to Shark Claws. These Shark Claws are just wildly overtuned compared to any similar item in the game right now. They are incredibly strong. They are straight up power creeping Dooley's weaponized core, and it's not even close. And sure, it's not like they're ruining the game. There are way more pressing concerns. But Shark Claw stands out as a gross outlier amongst the weapons available to wide Vanessa boards. If this is the intended power level, there are a lot of buffs that need to come. And if it's not, then obviously Shark Claws is too strong. And this Alpha Ray buff on Dooley does remind me, the Ray archetype on Dooley is horribly weak right now. To be fair though, so are like the weapons archetypes and the shields archetypes, really everything but the status spam archetype, and Dooley feels quite weak. I'll also note that Quick Freeze kind of got missed in the previous round of nerfs. All of the on blank freeze effects were nerfed by 1 second to be 2 seconds at silver tier, 4 at diamond. Quick Freeze just didn't get hit in that round of nerfs. It's still going under the radar, so I'll mention it again. And when we nerfed all of these starting skills that dealt damage over time, like Fiery, from 2-4-6-8 to 1-2-3-4, Chemical Fire wasn't a starting skill because it starts at silver, but it was still going for like the same general effect. So now at silver, Chemical Fire is technically better than Fiery or the poison equivalent, and at every higher tier, it's just straight up better than the mono effect for poison or fire. Chemical Fire being objectively better than Fiery in burn builds doesn't really make sense, and it probably needs to be reined in. Not because it's overpowered, because I honestly don't think it is, but because it just doesn't make sense that it's better than the skills it's outperforming. Normally I'd be doing a recurring feedback bit here where I restate anything I've said in previous videos that's still true and I think is important, but that list is getting longer. It's taking like 5+ minutes every video, so instead it's being turned into a text document and it'll be scrolling past you right now. If anyone gives a shit, you can go ahead and pause it. But I feel like it's a waste of my breath and your time to actually say it out loud, because if Tempo cares, a Word document is more helpful, and if they don't, well, that's probably why it's still recurring feedback and it's not going to be very useful. For now, I've got it ordered by how important it is to me. I might start ordering it by how long it's been on the list in the future. Just the newer it is, the higher up it goes. But frankly, that's pretty unimportant, not really a big deal. Now, it's time for that rant I mentioned at the start of the video about how we got in the current situation where Tempo has more or less officially cut communication with us until an undisclosed time in the future when in-game communication has been developed. I was going to quote Raynad here, but as we all know...
As a quick reminder before we get started, if you ever see anyone on the internet quoting me or saying Raynad said, please know that that is almost always followed by a lie.
As part of the nameless, faceless community who cannot be trusted to quote Raynad reliably, I will allow Raynad to speak for himself and then respond to it.
Not going to be doing more in the future. Like, this is probably the last video I make for quite some time. I just don't enjoy it that much, and I worry that when we try to inform people, it creates less informed people. Like there's more misinformation that comes out of it than informed people.
To me, that does not sound like an argument that communication isn't useful or good. If the attempt to communicate results in more misinformation than there previously was, that should be a cause for reflection that something has gone horrifically wrong in the communication process.
I announced a couple changes in no detail in the video we did last time around, and I noticed that after folks spent a couple days lying about what was going into the patch, even the day after the patch was out, there were a lot of people very upset about things that weren't even in the game. And we want to avoid situations like that.
Me personally, if a bunch of people wound up misinformed after and I quote, I just played the clip, I don't have to do it again, announced a couple of changes in no detail. And my patch notes included a total of 12 words under the subscription section. No, seriously, let me show you. The subscription section in these patch notes, including the title bullet, is a total of 12 words. Across the prize pass and subscription sections, not once are the words monetization, price, anything of the sort ever used. I mean, the career page and stat tracking is obviously less important, and it actually has one more word than subscriptions does, despite the fact this bullet literally just says it exists now in so many more words. So, if I had announced a couple of changes in no detail, I might come to the conclusion that I could have easily avoided that misinformation by including details. This whole thing just strikes me as sour grapes. It went poorly, so it must not be worth doing. I get that on a personal level. I sympathize. I very genuinely don't want this to feel like an attack against Reynad. I am trying very sincerely to literally describe what has happened. I love the guy. Personal sympathy isn't really how this needs to be handled, though. Having failed to effectively convey changes should be a reason for a business to review how they communicate. It is not a reason for a business to give up on communication. And to some degree, that's what the whole Season 1 video was about. That they were done doing patch videos, and they're going to implement this directly into the game and communicate differently going forward. But that's not really a solution. That doesn't fix the problem. In the short term, that's worse. With no stopgap, that's just an unpleasant and entirely unknown period of time where shit sucks. I can't have confidence that it's going to get fixed quickly either. This is the official launch, and new players get nothing from normals, and there is no codex to help them learn. The onboarding process wasn't fixed for launch. That seems far more urgent to me. The codex has been in the works literally for the entire game's lifespan. It was mentioned when Raren first showed off the game before closed beta even launched, and we have now officially launched without it. Telling me that in-game communication is in the works is of literally no value to me at this point. It's just a problem that needs to be fixed on my end. And it doesn't need to be Reynad if he's better about the community. It doesn't even need to be a video. It just needs to be something. The decision not to communicate is not good for your community or the health of your game. Reevaluate how we got here and what it benefits the company to continue on this course. The current situation is one wherein players experience constant frustration and confusion, and there's not really a reason for it to be this way. So do it differently. And once again, if any of this comes off as directly hostile to Tempo or Reynad, that is not my intent. It is a messy situation where there's a lot of antagonism between Reynad and the community, and literal descriptions of events will inherently get messy with it. I do not mean this as an attack, I mean this as a genuine advice for the health of the game. Anyways, that'll be all for now. Apparently I forgot to do a call for action, so if you want to hit the like and subscribe buttons, I'd appreciate it, but I mean, live your life, do your shit. Like I was saying though, thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next one.